Trying again. Waiting for your stream to go live, OBS says, but at least I'm seeing visuals. Looks like it's doing the normal thing, not crashing like it did twice while I was loading up. And it says I'm live. So welcome to Faith Vocals. My name is Faith. Today's a special day on the Faith Vocals channel. Last week I had a particular topic in mind. I wanted to talk a little bit about how I, as a Christian, feel society is going in light of what the Bible says about the mark of the beast and future Christian persecution. And so had a particular topic in mind, had a lot of engagement on the channel in chat. A lot of questions were being asked, and I didn't have the time to answer them because they were kind of off topic from where I wanted to go. So I committed to following up next stream, doing a question and answer session. And we'll see how that goes. Hopefully the folks with questions will show up, and I'll be able to answer some questions about Christianity from my point of view. So what I try to do on this channel is I want to present my perspective as a Christian. I think my Christianity affects how I view the world, how I perceive the reality around me. That's going to be different, say, than someone who doesn't hold Christian beliefs. And I think it would be interesting for us to kind of compare and contrast our belief systems and how that affects our perspective around us. I think our society turns out to be pretty polarized today. I think there's pretty much consensus about that. A lot of people setting themselves on opposite sides of different issues. Politics has gotten to be really prominent and heated, at least in the echo chamber that I frequent on the internet. And so how do we resolve all of our differences, either politically or religiously or in light of truth in general, philosophically? And from what I understand, the way that we would do that would not necessarily be to try to convince someone to come to our side. You can't control whether someone is ready to be persuaded to your worldview or not. But I think what we ought to be trying to do is having a conversation where we would say, I believe this, and someone else would be saying, well, I believe this. Keep bumping my mic, I apologize. So we compare our beliefs, we contrast our beliefs, we try to find out where we disagree and where we agree. We all operate in the same world, so I believe we all agree on some point. I believe every person believes at least one truth and at least one lie. And the reason not lie per se, but falsehood. We'll say falsehood. The reason I believe that is because let's see, which one do I start with first? As a Christian, I do believe God is omniscient, and I believe he made us humans finite beings. So since we're finite, we can't encompass all of the knowledge that is out there. There is certainly more knowledge to be had in the universe than the human race currently possesses. That's why we've got people who are interested in things like science and philosophy and religion. And so the goal is... let's see, I was talking about why we each believe a lie. We've got this finite scope of knowledge, and I think just probabilistically, with all of the knowledge that's out there that's beyond our grasp, there's probably some evidence out there. If we knew all of the facts available, there's something out there that's probably going to disrupt one of the beliefs that we already have, some part of reality that is in disagreement with something that any given one of us believes. So I think probabilistically, nobody believes 100% truth. I think my argument for us believing the truth is more solid. It's not so much a probabilistic argument. A good question I've heard is it possible that everything you know to be true could be false? Every last thing. If someone wants to say yes to that question, yeah, it's possible. I could be a brain in a jar. It's possible that every last thing I believe to be true is false. Then everything I know to be true would be false. Then the question that follows, the next question that should be asked is, do you know that to be true? Do you know for true that everything that you know to be true could be false? Because if you know that to be true, then it's self-referential. So it is false that everything you know to be true could be false. So something that you know to be true would have to be true since you believe that everything you know to be true would be false. It gets confusing when you start talking about referential stuff. The idea is the whole thing breaks down. It falls into absurdity. So that is a sign that that your beliefs don't logically fit together, that there's some contradiction in your belief system. There's a paradox going on there. So looking at that, then I believe at least one of the beliefs that any given human beings has must be true. And then the other side, the probabilistic thing that I said, was that probably every one of us believes something that's false too. So even if I believe that my religious beliefs are true, I'm very interested in seeing what other people believe. I believe that we're going to, clearly if I've got a religious or a political or any kind of difference with you, then one of us is right, one of us is wrong. But then also we both operate in the same world. So we'll have a point where we disagree, and we'll also have points where we agree. So I'm very interested in getting down to what the differences are in our beliefs and where we agree and where those two things converge, where our agreements become disagreements. Because I think that's at the heart of whether our beliefs are true. If there's a disagreement at the edge of a point of agreement, where is it that that agreement becomes disagreement? For instance, there's been someone on the channel who asks really good questions. A lot of his questions are going, I assume I don't know the gender of this person, but if I don't know your gender, I'm going to assume you're male. That's just the way I think. So very good questions. Tends to ask brief questions that really deserve a whole video in and of themselves. So I may well be starting to make videos. I've been considering making videos for the channel in the past because, these live streams can be 2-3 hours long. I think in hindsight, people don't tend to want to dedicate 2 or 3 hours of their time to someone they don't know what kind of content I'm going to produce from looking at YouTube thumbnail. And I don't even make my own thumbnails. I tend to use the defaults that YouTube offers me. So you don't get a lot of information, unfortunately, from my presentation. So someone looking at that is going to say, no, I don't want to spend 2 hours of my life on something I don't know if I'm going to get any value from. But maybe they'd be interested in looking into it for 15 minutes, or if it looks like it's presented to some depth on a particular topic, then maybe that would be valuable. So I've been thinking about that, but I've been concerned that what if I hit topics that are important to me but are not important to other people? What topics would I start out with? So I haven't really gotten started on the video project yet. A lot of my time is spent planning ahead for the next live stream. Now that I have a bunch of questions from the last stream that people have offered, and they're big questions, they're good questions, then maybe I am one step closer to having that video having video topics that I can produce into what I think of as static videos. So on a live stream, I can interact with you directly. We can have a two-way conversation. In a static video, I would be able to be dedicated to just one topic and to getting down in depth on what I believe about the one topic. In light of scripture, I try to keep my beliefs in line with the Bible. It doesn't mean I interpret it properly all the time. My goal is to interpret it properly. So what I offer here on the channel is my best at coming to the truth based on the Bible. I do believe that the Bible I believe that God is the source of all truth and that God is honest. So what God says in the Bible is true and is important to us in how we learn the truth and how we order our lives. So on this channel, I'm presenting my subjective interpretation and experience as a Christian, since I do believe that each of us has these breaches where we believe a truth and then we believe a falsehood in another place. So how do you determine which of the things we believe are true or false? We tend to be emotionally committed to everything that we believe. If we believed something that we knew to be false, we would change our mind. So of course, everything we believe to be true. And that's kind of the underlying question, I think, at this channel is how do we parse truth and untruth? What is the method by which we determine the difference between truth and untruth? One thing that I've been thinking of in the past is, well, just recently, one of the conclusions that I've come to recently about me, when someone presents me with a new fact, something I've never heard of before, how likely am I to accept that new fact as true and ingrain it into my frame of the world? What makes it likely for me to believe that fact or disbelieve that fact? And I think a big factor in whether I will believe something I'm told immediately or whether I'm going to disbelieve it at first or just be reserved about it, not really ready to accept it into my frame of the world, is how familiar is that fact to me. If you say something that is very different from anything that I have ever heard before, I'm going to hold it aside. I'm going to say I'm not ready to accept that yet. Just it sounds too strange. I don't know how to understand what it is you're giving me to know whether it's true or not. If you say something that sounds a lot like things I've already heard, then I am more likely to accept the truth that you have, or the thing that you have offered me, whether it's true or not. I'm more likely to accept it into my framework of the world. So the question is, should familiarity be a determining factor of truth? Should you decide that something is true or false based on how familiar it already is to you? And I would say that's not a logical standard for determining the truth. It's kind of a bummer that it's a factor. It's a bummer that I'm gauging how quick I am to believe based on how familiar that thing is to me, because it's not necessarily a determiner of how truthful that thing is, how familiar it is to me. On the other hand, familiarity does help. Familiarity indicates good evidence, because if something fits in well with the framework that I have been living my life by, this is the framework that has worked for me in reality, then the framework, if it fits into that framework, then it's likely to fit into reality, since my framework has already fit into reality. Whereas if it's something completely alien to the framework that has already been fitting into reality for me, then how do I know if that's going to break something in a way that doesn't fit with reality anymore? So I think there is reason to hold on to what's familiar. However, I do think that that's a subjective standard that breaks down. Very often, people sometimes have this crisis of belief. They have a paradigm shift because some part of their familiar frame, their familiar way of viewing the world, has broken down and no longer fits reality anymore. And then you have to figure out how where you need to fix your whole system, what you need to throw away and what you need to keep. I have a friend who, I had a friend who had one of these paradigm shifts, I think, definitely affected both of our lives drastically. And so those can be world-rocking when that happens. So I tend to ramble. I tend to derail and lose trains of thought. So hopefully once there are questions to answer, then that derailment will not happen so much. We'll see. because that is my tendency, but hopefully I'll be able to stick on a particular topic. I think basically I'm rambling so that I can explain the purpose for this channel, which is I want to be able to hold my worldview and to accept that you hold your worldview for good reasons, and to see what those reasons are, and to be able to discuss the differences in our worldview and the reasons that we think each one is true without tearing each other apart over it, which I think is common in our modern day internet world. People tend to tear other people apart because they don't believe the same things. I think it's, possible to have a conversation about truth and reality and how we should function in reality without necessarily doing that, without tearing one another down. So I did take some of the questions from the last stream. Let me grab my note cards here. And while I'm waiting for people to come in with fresh questions, I'll go ahead and see if I can address some of the ones that came up last stream. I've got them bundled in with some of the things I was wanting to look over and research for this stream. Trying to figure out which one I want to address first. So we have one person who comes to the channel pretty frequently. I think I started to mention him before. I'll go ahead and continue my thought about that. I don't know if I fully finished it. But someone who, if I were going to boil down the difference between our beliefs, the difference that I see core between the two of us is that I believe that God is not only good, God is the basis for goodness. We determine goodness because we're made in God's image. And so we have an innate sense of who God is, and we are looking at our world saying internally, not in words, subconsciously, does this fit with God's character? And the Bible says that every single person knows God. We suppress God in our knowledge because we are in rebellion against God, and so we don't want to have being higher than us. We want to be fully autonomous. We want to be God over our own lives. We don't want to be subject to a righteous standard, especially since we're in rebellion against God. That righteous standard would naturally be opposed to us because it's common knowledge. Nobody is perfect. And every one of us has done more than make mistakes. I want to make sure, as I talk about the subject of sin, I bring this up often in my intros. The Bible teaches that human beings sin against God. This is our act of rebellion where the things that we do that are sin, that are opposed to God's character, they may look small to us, but in actuality, they're us shaking our fist in God's face and saying, I don't want you to exist. I do not want you to be the boss of me. And so I can't kill you. I can't eliminate God from reality. So I am going to ignore you. I am going to deny your existence. I am going to live as if you don't exist. And so when we do things that are immoral, morality, as I believe it being determined by God's character, then we are doing our utmost best to erase God from reality, which is impossible. It's not reasonable to try to erase God from reality. But that is what any act of sin, any act of immorality is our rebellion against God. And so if God, as the Bible teaches, is the perfect standard for morality, then if he is over us, which is as the Bible teaches, it says that God is sovereign, then that puts us in a bad place where God then has to judge us for our act of rebellion against him. And so let me go ahead and get into the question that I'm trying to lead into here. That is my my basic framework for belief. That is what I believe. That is my side of the discussion. This individual who I'm hoping will be on stream today, who has been on stream multiple times, and I appreciate when he comes on, has good questions. His belief seems to be at its heart that God is evil. And so hopefully if he comes on, then he can give more detail about that as he finds it necessary for us to communicate. But the sense that I get is that he really does want God not to exist, because God, in his frame of belief, is evil and is the opposite of the standard of good, or at least behaves opposite of the standard of good. I've heard of that kind of argument where people look at the God of the Bible, and especially the Old Testament is a book that's very different from our culture. The punishments for sin in the Old Testament that the nation of Israel was to give are very harsh punishments. And God delivered the people of Israel from Egypt, and he sent them to what's called the Promised Land, which was already occupied by nations that the Bible says were very evil. And God's reason for moving Israel there is God was going to have Israel wipe out those nations and give Israel that land. And so for us, that is very antithetical to our culture. And so I definitely see why people look at that and say that God is not right to do that. So the difference in, say, my belief and his belief is who gets to decide what is moral. Is morality decided by human beings, or is morality decided by the God who created human beings? And this individual I'm thinking of would deny that God created human beings. I'd be interested in hearing more of what his thoughts are on that. But his question that I want to address, he kind of asked a few questions along the same lines. Is God truly perfectly moral? And then later on, another time he asked, is God perfectly just? So let me go ahead and say, I think there is a difference between those two questions. And I would say yes to both of those, but there's a difference to both of those questions. Because when we're talking about, is God perfectly moral, then we're saying that, is God, in a moral sense, good? Completely good? Does God embody goodness fully? Is God entirely good in and of himself? And so, yes, I would say God is all good. God is not evil. There is no evil in God. That is correct, that God is perfectly moral. And not only that, God is so moral that morality itself is determined by who God is. So that is my position in response to that question. But when this individual asked me, is God perfectly just? That to me seems like a different question. Because now we're going from the big concept of morality down to a small part of morality, justice. And I do believe that God is just. God, the same way that God defines morality, I do believe that God defines justice. The Bible says that vengeance is God's, and God being moral, it's vengeance in a good sense. Sometimes when we get hurt, we don't just want to repay the harm done to us. Sometimes we want to do more harm than has been done to us. And I think that, I believe that as an aspect of God's perfect justice, he is not going to go beyond what is right in repaying harm. God's justice is appropriate. So perfectly appropriate. However, if you ask, is God perfectly just? Then there's the other side of that would be, is God entirely in and of himself justice? Does justice define who God is? And that's one of the things that kind of twist my brain around in my head. There's a verse in I believe it's First John in the New Testament, close to the end of the Bible. And it tells us that God is love. So just 3 words, God is love. I believe that means that like God is the definition of morality, God is the definition of love. We determine whether something is truly love based on whether it matches the characteristics of God. But we're more familiar, I think, with the concept of love than we are with the concept of God. As when we're born hopefully into a family that is loving, a family that wants us. We grow up, we have friends who love us, maybe in a different way, but in a sense, care about us, want what's best for us, hopefully. We may find a spouse who we love and who loves us in a different sense than with our parents, than with our friend. It's a different kind of love. We're fully committing and attaching ourselves to that person, at least in the framework of biblical godly marriage. And so we live a life that explores love in many different forms. And I think that is a practical reality that we're familiar with, where God is, for some people, an ethereal concept. Lots of people have different ways of understanding God. Some people don't even consider the reality of God. They don't even explore that possibility. They've got other things to think about. So I think God can be for humans, can be a little bit more foreign to us, a little bit more alien than the concept of love. So if you've got a verse like God is love, does it work backwards? Love is God. That feels a lot to me like the kind of attitude of the 70s, where they were doing things that are very different than what the Bible suggests. I'm not an expert in any way on the 70s. That was a decade before my time. But as I understand it, rock and roll, drugs, sex, those are the defining sector, the defining factors of that era. And people were exploring the concept of free love, that kind of thing. And I think that is a very different thing than actual love. When I think of free love, I'm thinking of using another person for your pleasure. And that is very often unloving. We deceive ourselves into thinking it's loving if we think that both individuals are consensual. If each individual is using the other individual for their pleasure, then it's okay, right? No, it's still using somebody. And is that use harmful? I would suggest that if it's not in the biblical framework, the Bible teaches that sexual relationships are specifically for a man and a woman in a marriage relationship. One man, one woman, one marriage. Then you can have physical sexual relationships in the biblical understanding. And that is what's going to contribute to a loving relationship, where sex is a byproduct of that. But what is the center of that relationship is your commitment to one another and helping one another to grow to be better people under God during the course of your lifetimes. And hopefully bringing up another generation too. So let's see, I was getting there from, okay. So looking at, is God just? I believe God is justice, just like God is love. Does that mean that love is God? That is very different. That is idolizing this concept of love that we Christians too, but humans in general, may deform. Like the free love idea that I was talking about, which I understand to be using another human for your pleasure. That is a twisted version of the actual concept of love. It has changed the actual concept of love, so it is no longer love, is what I believe based on what the Bible teaches about those kinds of relationships. And so if we're setting up love as God, then we're making this concept of love to be greater than the concept of God. And that's not what the Bible does. It says God is love. Love gets defined by who God is. God is not defined by our understanding of what love is. So just the same as God is love, God is justice, as I understand it. There's no verse that directly says God is justice, but as I look at how we determine right from wrong, truth from falsehood, beauty from ugliness, I think there are these concepts that have objective truth to them. And so that objective truth or reality comes from who God is. And justice would be one of those. So is God perfectly just? That gets down to, what are we holding higher? Are we judging God by the standard of our human understanding of justice? That would not be true. So if we're saying that God has to conform to what I believe justice is in order for God to be just, then that is not true. Justice has to conform to who God really is, regardless of what we think of him. So in that sense, God is perfectly just because God defines what justice is. So then another question that this individual asked last week is, if God is perfectly just and mass destruction is his solution, why are there so many examples in the Bible of innocent people being punished? So there's something embedded there. The question is a little bit loaded. And he says mass destruction is God's solution. What is this individual getting at here? What I think he's getting at, sounds like he's very familiar with the Bible and with Christianity, the way that he asks his questions. So I'm assuming that he's coming from a position of some knowledge about what I believe as a Christian. As I've said, God being the perfect standard of justice, he must judge us when we're in rebellion against him, when we're shaking our fists saying, I don't want God or his morality or his justice to exist over me. And so God has to deal with that justly. We are a finite being that he created, who wants to wipe out our infinite creator, who is the establishment of order. The Bible uses the concept called the Logos. It says that Jesus is the Logos. So it's translated the Word in the book of John, the very beginning of John 1:1 talks about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and nothing was created that was created without the Word. And it gets into, this is Jesus, who came and walked among us and was a human being with us on this world. Jesus is God, God the Son, in our Trinitarian Christian understanding of who God is. And he stepped down from heaven and took on humanity, became a finite being like one of us. And why did he do that? Because God being the perfect standard, us being in rebellion against God, if we want to wipe out who God is, then we are trying at the same time, trying to wipe out the Logos, trying to wipe out the order of our system. And if there's no order, there is only chaos, nothing holds together, and the entire fabric of reality, I believe, would be erased, ended, if there was no God. If somehow humanity could eliminate God, then reality itself would come apart at the seams, I believe, based on what I see in the Bible. And of course, if humanity could overpower God, could eradicate God, then that would not be God. I believe Godness includes being undefeatable. There's an aspect of that in who God is. What I've been doing lately is I've been going through Genesis. I've been through Genesis chapter 1 so far over the course of about 3 weeks, and kind of been hitting the Bible, trying to go through it, as there's nothing else for me to talk about, which since I do have a plan going through the Bible, then usually I focus on talking about that rather than on current events. So I've had this plan, what I'd like to do, and I think it will take me forever to get through this, but I would like to go through the Bible and kind of provide a context for what I believe as a Christian. So as I would be going through the Bible and talking about it, I'd kind of be reacting, kind of like reaction videos to this biblical text that I believe in. And hopefully that would give you, my viewers, context into why we Christians believe the way we do, why I hold the sweeping, broad scope beliefs about morality and beauty and logic and the things that I do. So let's see. I've gone off on a tangent and need to find my way back again. So I was talking about how God needs to judge us because we, finite created beings, have shaken our fist at our infinite creator whose identity holds the entire universe together. And so that is a grave crime. That is not just murder. That is nihilism. That is total destructiveness. That deserves a grave punishment. And the grave punishment that the Bible describes, I believe it has to be an eternal punishment because we, a finite being, are rebelling against an infinite God. And were our actions to play out if God did not resist us, if we were allowed to do as we like, then it would lead to total destruction. So I believe God is just when he says there is a place of eternal torment for the souls that are in rebellion against him. The Bible describes it as the lake of fire. There's other names for it, but at the very end of the Bible, it says that death and Hades, which we understand to be the Greek word for the place of death, often gets used in the Bible for the location where people who do not believe in God go. Those get cast into the lake of fire, and there is eternal torment for those who remain in rebellion against God, according to the Bible. So a very unpleasant teaching in Scripture. I say it because I believe it to be true, and we need to deal with that, whether or not that's a reality. And if it's a reality, then what do we do about it? Can we do anything about it? And so that's where I believe the person I'm talking about says if God is perfectly just and mass destruction is his solution. Because the truth is, if all of us are in rebellion against God, the Bible teaches that no one is sinless. All of us have rebelled against God. Then what do we look forward to? Every single one of us is worthy of this eternal torment, mass destruction. And at the end of the Bible in Revelation, it says there's coming a time when God will attack the earth with a series of judgments that will deface the earth, will cause ecological damage, will cause economical damage, will take a slew of lives before finally justice is demanded of everyone who has rebelled against him. So, mass destruction. So if God is perfectly just and mass destruction is his solution, why are there so many examples in the Bible of innocent people being punished? So I do hope this individual comes on and can explain to me what he means by innocent people. Because I do recognize we look at someone and we say, that's a nice person. That's a good man. I could trust my life with that man. He would take care of me because he is a good man. He's kind and compassionate. He's wise. I would listen to that man because I know he's honest. That is a good man. But the Bible teaches that, and we recognize nobody is perfect. All of us have rebelled against God. So is this individual talking in the sense of when he says innocent people? Is he talking in the sense of why are people who have never sinned being punished? Because the Bible would disagree. The Bible would say everyone has sinned. The only person who did not sin was Jesus, who is the Son of God. So he, being God himself with a mission to live a righteous life so that he could die a criminal's death, so he could take our punishment for sin on himself, did not sin. And I'm so grateful he did, or else there would be no hope for us. Because Jesus lived a perfect life, is the only human being on this earth who ever lived a perfect life, and died that death to take on our punishment for us, now we have an option. Are we going to go all the way to that state of mass destruction and to the lake of fire to be tormented for eternity? If Jesus had not been here, there would be no other choice. That would be the end for all of us. And come to think of it, I had not thought of it until this moment. There was one innocent person who was punished. Whether you are looking at it from the position of, that's a good man, I would trust that man. Or whether you're looking at it from the position of, that person has never, ever done any wrong. He's never sinned. There was one person who was punished, who was totally innocent. So Jesus Christ, the Bible says that he was sinless. God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, so that we might have the righteousness of God. That's a verse from the Bible, quoting it off the top of my head. I hope I'm quoting it right. I think I've got the gist of it. So, here's the question. Why was an innocent person punished? Is it because mass destruction is God's solution? I do believe mass destruction is necessary because every single human being on earth has rebelled against God. There is no one innocent except for Jesus. So all of us must be punished. And the punishment is for a grave crime. It's the crime of total nihilism against an infinite God. When we have no standing because we are his creation, he has the sovereignty, the right to say what happens to us. We don't have that right over him or over each other. So that nihilism is a grave crime. And there are some people who would like to believe that, well, the punishment for that should just be that we cease to exist. Some people may go to heaven and live for eternity, and that's great. But those of us who rebel against God, we should just cease to exist, right? Because that's what we tried to do to God, is cause him to cease to exist. It goes deeper than that. Because we are, it's an infinite crime against an infinite creator who is endlessly innocent. I do believe that God does no wrong because God is the standard for morality. Morality is subject to God. God is not subject to morality. And by the way, there's a dilemma called Euthyphro's dilemma. Am I teaching that God arbitrarily says what's good or evil and tomorrow he could change his mind and say that murder is good? No. What I'm teaching is that good and evil come from God's nature, which the Bible tells us is unchanging. It tells us God never changes. So we don't have to worry about God getting a wild hair and deciding to upend the moral law. So let me get back on track again. It is just for God to demand mass destruction. So does God consider this to be a solution? And I would say that the existence of Jesus, the only innocent person who actually was punished, the only innocent person to live, and the only innocent person to be punished. His existence implies that mass destruction was not a solution to God, it was a problem. God did not consider mass destruction to be a solution. It is going to be the end of our world, but that is not a solution to God, that is a problem. And so that problem needed to be solved. God is perfectly just. So the mass destruction was necessary because all of us have rebelled against God. If that problem was not solved, we would all be wiped out and tormented for eternity as punishment for our sins. And that was not a reality that God wanted. That was not positive to God. That is not the world that God set out to create. So what's the solution? Since God is perfectly just, that standard is kind of unyielding. God is also, I believe, perfectly merciful. And that is why I hesitate to say that God is defined by justice, that God is fully just. Justice is fully under God's character. But God is also merciful, and that is kind of in opposition to justice. So God fully defines mercy also. And mercy is when justly I should punish you because you have really actually wronged me and I have the right to demand that punishment. But instead I say, I am going to set aside my need to punish you because I want to be merciful, because I care about you, because I don't believe you can bear up under the weight of that punishment and I want you to survive. So how can God be fully just? And in this sense, I'm not saying how is God fully characterized by justice. In this case, I am saying, how does God enact full justice, which he ought to, because he's the definition of justice. How does God enact full justice and at the same time show the mercy that is part of his character also? That just standard is unyielding. We all must be punished, or at least punishment, infinite punishment must be inflicted on the guilty. And so God's solution was that we get into Trinitarian doctrine, it's kind of difficult, but God is a being, which would be described by what God is. So his godness is his being. And then we believe that that being is described by three persons, three who's. So there's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. So God the Son came down into earth. God, the offended party, stepped into earth, became a human being, took our punishment, and it is mind-blowing to me that our sin was an act of attempted murder against God. Not that we could do anything. The best we can do is imagine that God's not there. But it's an act of attempted murder against God. And God, in his mercy, said, I'll let you murder me. Stepped into our world, did nothing wrong, was framed by the religious community, was killed by the Roman government, at the instigation of the religious community, at the behest of the religious community, and was murdered for telling the truth, for saying that he was God. That was no crime. That was the truth. It would have been a crime for him not to tell us that he was God. And people will say, well, where did Jesus actually say he was God? I think he said it more clearly for the people of his time than if he had simply said, I am God. I think we can get into that discussion later. So God's solution for us, in order to not violate that unyielding standard of justice, but to show us his mercy, was for him to step into our reality and be murdered so that he could take on the punishment, that mass destruction that was awaiting us fell on God the Son. So Jesus picked up the problem and put it on his shoulders. So does that mean the mass destruction goes away? Does that mean that everybody now is going to heaven? Our crime against God is our choice. Nobody forces us to sin against God. Now you could say somebody put a gun to my head and I had to commit wrong because my family was in danger. Maybe you're in that kind of a dire situation, that kind of thing. But there are other things that we do that in the great scheme of things are just as nihilistic. If I tell a white lie, then that is denying the existence of the standard of what is true. Denying God's existence. He is the standard of truth. And so that is just as nihilistic as me embezzling someone to get funds to pay for my family's ransom or something. I think we would understand a person who's in the case of a gun to their heads doing something evil. But the tiny sins that we do for our own convenience, that is, when you understand it in the sense of the nihilism that leads to, then it is not justified at all. So we've made a conscious choice to rebel against God at some point in our lives. And so it is necessary that we make a conscious choice to accept the payment for our punishment. Do we want to be saved from the destruction that's awaiting us? And God gives each of us the freedom for that choice. So trying to get my thoughts together. I would love to be saying less often. I was listening to myself last week. I say all the time, so it would be great if I could break that habit. Jesus took that punishment, that mass destruction awaiting us, upon himself, but it is still our choice whether we accept what he did for us. So if we make that choice, I've made that choice to say, I believe that God is real and that God is sovereign and that God is right to set the standard that he has morally, that I have violated, that is true. And I am definitely deserving of the wrath that the Bible says is awaiting me for my rebellion against God. And I am so grateful that his solution is to take my destruction on himself, on God the Son, Jesus, so that he has promised to me that I can live for eternity as an adopted member of his family. I get an honored role as his heir. And absolutely, that's what I want. Someone else gets the choice to say, no, that is in no way appealing to me. I would rather be in rebellion against God. I would rather God did not exist. I do not repent of the nihilistic behavior that I am doing. I prefer my own way to the standard of reality. Okay? So that person chooses to undergo the problem. That person chooses to walk through the problem of mass destruction. Now, as long as you live, the solution is still available. As long as you live, you still have the choice to accept Jesus' death and resurrection. I should mention, Jesus rose from the dead, which means that God accepts God the Father accepts the payment of God the Son. Says this is a sufficient solution for that problem. So that solution is available to you as long as you live. I would recommend that you accept the solution sooner rather than later. Because death can be unpredictable for one thing, but the other thing is, as a Christian, I recognize that my life has been very fulfilling. I believe that the teachings of the Bible save me from a number of traps that await those who just don't know better. I have a community around me through my church that supports me and wants what's best for me. And they're trying to help me to be a better, more fulfilled person. They're not trying to drag me down into divisive behavior, or divisive may not be the best word, degrading behaviors. They're not destructive behaviors. So I highly recommend the Christian lifestyle. And God's solution is his Son taking on the problem of mass destruction on his shoulders by paying the punishment that's necessary for our sins. It is necessary for us to acknowledge that we have sinned and that we are insufficient to pay it for ourselves. We're finite beings with an infinite crime against us. I mean, that we have committed against God. It's, there's some sort of legal analogy I can make here. My brain is not fully bringing it together. It's on our record. That's what I'm looking for. And the solution is that Jesus has taken that on himself so that we can then have life in the order that God intended originally. And the Bible says that after God has destroyed the world as it currently is, has purged it from all of the evil that has infused every aspect of the world that we've lived in, God will renew this world, and for eternity we'll be living in the order that he had planned, which we can see in the Garden of Eden. Like I said, I've been going through Genesis chapter 1 so far, getting into chapter 2. I look up at my second monitor where I've got the Bible website ready that I tend to go to, and I've got chapter 2 ready in case I need it. I don't plan to get to it today because I'm planning on a Q&A if people come up, show up with questions. And then, but that is what I've got on my screen there. So if you see me looking up, I'm looking up at the Bible website. So that is that question. I can set that aside. I think I have addressed that fully. Probably the most important question of the week last week. So I am very grateful to that individual who brought it up. Let's see. Trying to organize my note cards really quick and see where I am. I've got some that represent the questions that were asked and some that represent the some of the things I wanted to study in order to be ready for today. And let me get down to one question. We had there's another individual who's been a regular, and he had a number of very good questions. I was so dedicated on getting through my topic that just plugging away at my topic, and I later came back to the questions that were asked, and it was a surprise to me just how much depth there is in the questions that this individual asked. A younger person, from what I understand, so they look more basic on the surface, but they are covering deep subjects. And let's see, I can put those cards away. And so the question that he asked is, why do wars happen? So if he comes on, then that may be something that we could discuss if he's interested in that. But let me go ahead and pull up a Bible verse that crosses my mind as I consider that question. His full way of expressing it was, why do wars happen? It's like killing your species slowly. So I think baked into that question is this rational and understanding view of how destructive war is. And of course, we understand that humans are not always rational beings. They're in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the last four books of what's called the Pentateuch. The Bible has 5 books that are kind of in and of themselves the history of how Israel got started as a nation. And the first one is about the lineage from which Israel comes through Abraham. And the last 4 books are about how Israel had been enslaved in Egypt. The genetic lineage, the family of Abraham had moved to Egypt. And as the people grew, then the pharaohs were, especially one particular pharaoh, began to be threatened by their numbers and said, we have to enslave these people or else they're going to overrun us. And so he enslaved the people of Israel. He oppressed the people of Israel. He told the people of Israel they must kill their firstborn sons. Well, all of their sons, actually. They must kill their sons. Could only keep their daughters alive. And so it was a very bad situation for Israel before they became a nation. This family of the descendants of Abraham, the descendants of Isaac, the descendants of Jacob, and especially of Jacob. There were other people groups that came from Abraham and Isaac. So especially Jacob, that was the people that were in Egypt. And so Exodus teaches how God brought up a person from Israel who led them out of that slavery. Moses was God's spokesman to Israel to free them from Egypt and to lead them to the promised land, which I've mentioned before, which God gave them for their nation. And of course, as part of going to that promised land, there were already people in that land. The Bible tells us they were very wicked people. I was doing some study on the questions I was expecting to answer today. Came across some of the things that were described for them, very evil practices, and I think the one that most would stand out to us is as a part of their worship system, they would burn their children as sacrifices to the god Molech. So they would sacrifice their children to this idol, and for God, that's not a solution, that's a problem. So that was why God specifically sent Israel to these nations here. As Israel became its own nation later on, God never commanded Israel to go and wipe out other nations. Israel did have wars and conflicts with other nations that were attacking Israel, that were enemies to Israel. But God did not command Israel to be expansionist. As far as I understand, I don't have perfect knowledge of the Bible, but I don't see that in what I'm aware of. I do try to read through the Bible, or at least listen through the Bible on podcast pretty frequently, so I have been through the whole thing. And so we have these nations who God sent Israel to war with, because these nations were violating God's righteous standard to such a degree, more than the other nations. God was not commanding Israel to rid the world of any other nations, just these 6 that were so evil. And so that is a reason that wars happen, is it can be an aspect of God's judgment on people, especially in the case of Israel. And then later on, Israel became idolatrous, did evil things, started picking up the practices of the nations that God had sent them to wipe out. And so God sent the Babylonians and the Assyrians to war against Israel, to conquer Israel. They sent Israel into exile. That's what books in the Bible like Esther and Daniel describe. The book of Ezra and Nehemiah talk about when Israel was finally allowed to come back to their land. And and then later on, following the time of Jesus, Israel, I believe possibly God's response to Israel killing his son, because that was not justly done. Jesus did not deserve death. Israel did deserve judgment for their part in that. Then in 70 AD, so about 40 years after the fact, the Roman army took over Israel and dispersed the Jews of Israel. They were no longer allowed to live in the land, and Israel ceased to be a nation until 1948, so until nearly our time. And then in a series of what are pretty much miracles, that God allowed Israel to take back their land and to withstand against a number of enemies who were trying to keep them from reestablishing themselves. So that is, there's kind of a flow of war revolving around God's judgment of people who do evil. In the first case, it was the nations that occupied the land that Israel was going into. Then Israel became evil, and God judged them. God judged them, I believe, for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And then God allowed them to withstand war from their enemies when they were finally coming back to the land, which the Bible does predict would happen. That was a large reason why Israel made it back to the land. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. People around the time of the 1800s, 1900s were looking at the Bible saying Israel should be in that place that they left. And so that emboldened people to work for the existence of Israel again. Another thing that might cause war, so I want to bring up this verse. I've got James chapter 4 here. I do not visit the book of James often enough. That there was Christians after Christianity came to be. Jesus, of course, had his followers who recognized that he was the Messiah, especially after he rose from the dead. And those followers, after he ascended into heaven, after he was gone, they spread the knowledge of his death and resurrection around the world. And they had disciples of their own. They had followers of their own who were trying to understand what the apostles, like Peter, Paul, James, John, were telling them. We're trying to understand the scriptures. But as time goes over history, people's interpretations get read into their understanding of scriptures. And this is where someone like me who's a Protestant differs with someone who's a Catholic, because the Catholics would look at these later disciples of the apostles and would incorporate what they believe into the Catholics' understanding of how Christianity works. And for me as a Protestant, I'm saying, no, I just want to pay attention to the Bible. Other people might be in error. The Bible is true. And that's where I say on this channel, if you're listening to me and I say something that rings true for you, make sure you check it against the Bible first. Make sure that you have the full biblical context for what I'm saying, because I could be making a mistake. So don't just take me at my word. That was a point well made in the last stream. That was not my point to make. Someone else challenged me on that and was absolutely right to do so. Don't take my word for things. I offer my perspective because it's the best I can do. But definitely the Bible supersedes anything that I say. So here's this verse. James was one of these apostles. And I get into the story because there was this division between Christianity. I don't know the exact year, but when Catholicism and Protestantism split off, of course, marked by Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to the door famously on October 31st. There was this division between Christianity at the time, which was a more Catholic Christianity, and the Christianity that came out of it, Protestant Christianity. As long as we go back to the Bible, as long as the Bible is our own source, doesn't matter to me which side you come from. If the Bible is your sole source of truth, and you are accepting God's plan of salvation through Jesus as described through the Bible, then that is sufficient. Then we are brothers in Christ and a sister in Christ, and heaven bound for eternity. That's great. But if you're adding on your own works or your own beliefs or somebody else's beliefs onto the Bible, then that endangers you. I would say that is heresy and may cause you to miss God's plan of salvation through Jesus if you think you can get into heaven on your own. Or through a series of works, through confessing to a priest. If you think that's necessary in order to get you into heaven, I think you're missing the mark. So Luther was of course a prime mover in getting Christianity to be solely Bible focused. But when he was looking at the book of James, James has this concept of faith and works that wasn't fitting in with what Luther was understanding in the beliefs that he was coming to. And so Luther wasn't actually sure that James ought to be in the Bible. He called it a right strawly epistle because James teaches that our faith should be demonstrated through our works. Luther wasn't really sure what to do with that from what I understand. I'm getting this secondhand, so you can check into who Luther was and where he came from theologically and double check me on that. But that's what I've been told. But James does have a kind of a firm tone to him that is not in the other epistles. I think a lot of the epistles come across as being reasonable and having strong arguments and layers of logic about who Jesus is and what that means for us. And James kind of has an accusatory tone. So look at this passage here. From whence comes wars and fightings among you? And of course, he's talking to Christians in this case. He's talking to the church. So this is not necessarily global scale wars. This may be conflicts within the church, but I think it scales. I think it can refer to global wars also. From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence even of your lusts that war in your members? So I'll tell you what, let me change to a version of the Bible that's a little bit more modern. I think there are a number of good versions that reflect the meaning of the original documents. The original documents are perfect and inerrant as I understand them. And the versions that we have are very close because we do our best as Christians to get back to those originals as close as possible, given the limitations of translation. So ESV is another version I like. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? But from the King James, you see the word war is there. I think that's why this is applicable. Is it not this that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. Again, he's talking to Christians. I don't know if he's referring to Christians of the day who were Christians at the time, or if he's referring to how they used to live as non-Christians. There's a story in the Bible about a couple named Ananias and Sapphira who lied about how much money they were giving to the church. They were dishonest. White lie doesn't seem to be a huge deal, but they died as a result of that lie, that seemingly harmless lie that they told the church that they were giving 100% of the cost of their property and not just a portion of it. So, given that story with God being so firm about a white lie, I'm wondering about this. Is James referring to actual behavior he's heard of, or is James being hyperbolic as they tended to do in the Middle East? Still, I think, tend to do in the Middle East, from what I've heard. Is he being hyperbolic to make a point? But I think we can identify with a human desire sometimes when we want something that somebody else has. Sometimes murder might be a fantasy. And for some people who have the power, it may actually be a deed. And of course, this taken to a grand scale is war. A nation has a resource that another nation wants. You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You are elevating yourself as God. You are not saying, God, I would love the resources that you want to give me in order to do your work. That should be the attitude that we do have And a passage of the Bible crosses my mind in Matthew 6. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these things, by this Jesus meant the food, the clothing, the things we need to sustain ourselves, will be added to you. And so that is the Bible's explanation of what causes war, what causes the conflicts that lead to war, and what is the solution. James, again, very abrasive in the way that this book is written, but divinely inspired. So this is the way that God wanted it written. Even more abrasive in some versions. These footnotes, it's the translators of the Bible. They're looking at all of the different manuscripts that are available to us in the Bible, and trying to figure out which ones are closest to the originals. And so they may see something translated a little bit different in this manuscript, but most of them read this way. And so in especially the newer versions of the Bible, like the English Standard Version, you get these footnotes where the translators are admitting there's another version that would put it this way. Seems like a small detail, adulterous people versus adulteresses, but we want to get it right, so we want to be careful. So, you adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Which is kind of what I've been saying. Even the small sins that we commit are nihilistic rebellion against God and his order. Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that Scripture says he yearns jealously over the Spirit that he has made to dwell in us? So he wants us to be submitted to him. That was the way he designed us to be. He is not willing to tolerate us elevating the things we want over what God tells us, over who God is. But then here's the solution. But he gives more grace. Therefore, it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. When we want something, when we look at what our neighbor has and we say, I should have that, I'm going to take it from them. We are elevating ourselves above our neighbor. That is pride mixed in with our selfishness, with our greed. And the solution is to submit ourselves to God. It says, resist the devil and he will flee to you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. So the passage continues. But this is the idea is if we were going to end all war in the world, I've given two reasons for war. We have this, which is covetousness, the desire for something we do not have that somebody else has, so we do what we can to take it from them. That's one reason. And also when people rebel against God so that God must judge them now, as opposed to waiting for the end of the world when his wrath is supposed to be, is planned to be inflicted on the world. That's another reason that wars may happen. What is the solution to those wars? It is to submit to God. If we were all submitted to God, if we all said, God, you created us, you are love, we know you care for us, we know you're going to take care of us, we know you're going to give us what we need. So we are not going to worry about what we have or do not have, because what we have is what you know we need, and you know we need not to have what we don't have. So if we had that hard attitude, then we would not have wars, because our passions would not be driving us to take what is not ours, and we would not be rebelling against God so that we would come under his judgment. But of course, every human is rebellious against God, and so we have wars. Okay. And I had an interesting question. Did we invent math, or did we discover it? As a Christian, I believe that we discovered math. I'll go back to Genesis. So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I'll scroll down a bit. There was evening and morning the first day. The second day. Where's the third day? The third day. And then God made the sun and the moon and stars on the fourth day. And I'll go ahead and go back over what he made on these days, because I think that's important. So light made on the first day. The sky, the firmament, made on heaven, made on the second day. The waters that were described in Genesis verse 1, verse 2, were gathered together, and land was created on the third day, as well as plants. So land and plants were created on the third day. On the fourth day, the sun, moon, and stars, the luminaries, were created. The fifth day, God created the birds and the fish. The sixth day, that's the critical day, that's the crucial day, God created the living creatures, and God created man on the sixth day. So we see this counting pattern, right? There's numbers associated to the day. There's the first, second, third, fourth. We're counting through these days. And man does not show up until the sixth day. So since man did not exist on the until the sixth day, how do we know what happened on each of the previous days? God told us, right? That's the only way we could possibly know this, is that God inspired the author of this book. I think that was Moses. Could well be that Moses, also being a noble of Egypt by adoption, could be that he had access to texts, historical texts, that he might have brought into his knowledge of the events that happened in Genesis, and so Moses may be more of an editor than a full author. However, I think that what Moses included in the first 5 books of the Bible, which I believe he wrote, would be inspired by God. God would help Moses if Moses was doing more of an editing job than a direct authoring or dictating job. Then God would have been behind the information that Moses chose to put into books like Genesis or Deuteronomy. And in this case, concerning the beginning of creation, I don't know how Moses would have had access to records of what happened on days 1 through 5, because there was no human being on days 1 to 5. It would take God's direct inspiration of Moses, either to have Moses write the account by hand, or to know who God had previously inspired, whose accounts we do not have. There's an individual in Genesis, we're going to see him later when I get to Genesis chapter 4, assuming I do, then named Enoch. And at the end of the Bible, in the book of Jude, that's the book right before Revelation, the final book of the Bible, Jude tells us some of the things that Enoch wrote. So apparently people in Jude's time were aware of writings that were attributed to Enoch. Since it's in the Bible, I'm going to err on the side of they actually were Enoch's writings. Since they're in the Bible, without any caveats or qualifiers, I'm going to err on the side of they were truth. So my perspective when I'm coming to the Bible is, if I disagree with the Bible in any respect, or if I have any skepticism about the Bible is never wrong. It could be that I have come up with an idea that's wrong and I need to discard that idea, or it could be that I do not understand the Bible. So it could be that I am misinterpreting the Bible. If I'm saying, well, Enoch must be true, that may not actually be what the Bible's saying. So I would have to adjust my position. But until I know better, I'm going to assume at face value that what the Bible says is true until I understand better. And the Bible is always going to supersede my my understanding of things. If I ever have a conflict with the Bible, I should not win, is my understanding. So Enoch would have been a writer. Enoch came between Adam and Moses, so maybe his writings were something that Moses could have made use of for understanding what happened early on. People lived to be 900 years old. Later on in Genesis, I believe it says Adam had his first son when he was about 130. had Cain, at least Cain, I believe there are children that Adam had that are not recorded directly in the genealogy, but had Cain in when he was 130, if I'm not mistaken. Let me, I'm curious. I'm just going to check that. Get to Genesis 4. Is that here? Yeah. No, maybe Genesis 5. Yeah. When Adam had lived 130, it was Seth that he had. And then 800 years later, Adam had other sons and daughters and lived to be 930 years total. Seth had Enosh. Let's see, there are these generations, but there are these relatively short. I mean, they look long to us. 65 years seems like a long time before you have a son, but relatively short. I believe Enoch possibly could have lived during the time of Adam, could have directly asked Adam what was creation like. Adam, of course, was not there for days 1 through 5. He was there on day 6. So that knowledge about days 1 through 5 would have to be inspired by God. And how do we know there were 5 days? It's because God was keeping count. So who invented mathematics? It was not man, it was God. At least according to the Christian understanding of reality. Starting to get parched here, so time for my water. Okay. And now I think the question, did we invent math or did we discover it, would be interesting to talk over, because what do we mean by math? Do we mean the sense that 1 apple plus 1 apple plus 1 apple is 3 apples, the threeness of that group of apples? Is that what we refer to? Because that is something I think is external to us as humans, definitely. If there's a place in Antarctica that's been so far undiscovered or something, then there's 3 mounds of snow. There are going to be 3 mounds of snow whether people come across them or not. As far as how we understand math, the formulas we use, like pi r squared to determine the circumference of a circle, is that invented or discovered? I would say the fact that we understand that works is discovered. The way we express it may be our invented way of expressing it. We know that the Romans had one set of numerals, and now we're using Arabic numerals, which actually, I was doing some video research today, so I came across a video that said actually the Arabic numerals came from Hindu cultures. So we have different ways of expressing it. We are inventing the ways that we understand the math that is coming to us. So one of the things that I learned as I was kind of dabbling in this, looking at this subject, is that Isaac Newton, of course, he invented a new branch of math to help him to do his physics. He invented calculus. And as he was making his calculations, from what I understand, he would take his calculations out to 3 decimal places. That was the math, the level of the math that he was doing in order to figure out how gravity works and all the things that he was studying. But the math that he did and the principles that he discovered continue to be accurate even if you take them out to 7 decimal places. So even to a finer level of precision, you get more and more precise. And it's not until 7 decimal places that his principles start to break down. So he had Newtonian physics, and now we're looking into quantum physics, because once you get down to those smaller levels, then it looks like physics works differently. That's the way I understand it from the layman's perspective. So, but it's amazing that Newton invented this math in order to do his work. Seems like he made it up based on the principles that he was observing, certainly based on reality, but based on his 3 decimal digit understanding of reality. And yet this thing that we say that we would assume Newton invented turns out to have been able to predict down to a 7 decimal level of precision. So did Newton really invent it, or was it something he discovered that was so precise that it continued to work long after he was done with it? And how do you get down to that level of precision? Is that something that man is capable of? I saw one of the videos that I came across was kind of patting us on the back. Good job, you've got good math. This framework of reality that you've invented is so good that you're able to predict far off gaseous bodies, stars, because of the math, and you're able to predict atomic structures because of the math. Good job, you're that smart. Are we really that smart? I don't think we're that smart. I think we're coming across God's brain in a way that's expressed, that we made in his image. He has given us the ability to grasp and to develop and to learn from. And so when we practice mathematics to make scientific hypotheses and predictions and find them to be true, then we are getting confirmation of the order of the creator of the universe at work. So I would answer that question that God has invented mathematics, which we discover. I believe that's the Christian perspective of it. But it would be cool to be able to talk about these questions and look at what do we mean by mathematics? What is it that we're trying to figure out is invented or discovered? What does inventing it look like versus discovering it? That kind of thing. And let me see if I have time for one more thing. I think I'll go ahead. I did a lot of study on one of the questions. So the question was, let me see if I can find the card that has the specific wording of the question I have in mind here. Please excuse me. Where is it? There it is. Okay. Why does the Old Testament state that women can be bought and sold like chattel? So that's the way that question was expressed to me. Now I am... chattel is not a word that I tend to use daily. So I am not perfectly familiar with all of the baggage that word may carry, but I am familiar. I understand chattel slavery is the kind of slavery that's associated with America, the Civil War. That's the kind of slavery that was used to that the Civil War was to disrupt partially. There were a lot of issues being addressed in the Civil War, just like we've got a lot of issues today. But the slavery that was under contention at that time was chattel slavery. So I did look up chattel in the dictionary. The definition that I saw was it's basically mobile property that moves, not like a house that stays stationary. Of course, the word sounds like cattle, so cattle would be mobile property. And treating people like cattle basically is the way that I understand that kind of slavery, which seems a lot like the way that we did it in America. And I think looking back at that period, we recognize that is a terrible way to live. If you are one of those people who is considered property and is considered cattle, and you're a master, tell you what, I'm going to need the Bible page in a bit. So let me prime this. Let me go to one of the passages I want to go to. But if your master has no accountability for how he treats you, then that is a terrible way of life if you're the slave of that kind of person. So definitely not in favor of that kind of slavery. So the question, why does the Bible say that women could be... I lost the card. Hold on. I'll pull it out where I can see it. Why does the Old Testament state that women can be bought and sold like chattel? So I was looking specifically in those first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. The Jews call it the Torah. You have the book of Genesis, which is the history of where Israel came from. Exodus talks about how Israel was freed from Egypt, but it also gets into what's probably kind of the closest thing to the Constitution of Israel. Gets into the laws that Israel was supposed to practice. Let me see what's in Exodus 20 here. 19. So the way that it works in Exodus, it starts out with Israel being in the land of Egypt. God rescued Israel from Egypt. So the Israelites were freed, but Pharaoh wasn't happy. He pursued them. They got to the Red Sea. God parted the Red Sea so that Israel could come through. But the Egyptian army got close up the Red Sea, and they drowned in the Red Sea. So Israel goes on through past the Red Sea, and they come to Mount Sinai. And that's where God calls Moses on Mount Sinai and gives him the law that Israel was supposed to have. And initially, God was going to speak directly to Israel. There were a lot of rules about who could go up on Mount Sinai, but God was going to be speaking to the entire nation of Israel from Mount Sinai. So that is what Exodus 19 talks about. The Lord called to Moses out of the mountain. Let me see if Moses came, all the elders of the people, and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him. I'm trying to see if this is where God's giving the commands. Behold, says, and the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever. So God was going to give the people face-to-face experience with who he was. So the people were supposed to consecrate themselves, which means they were supposed to behave in a way that revered God. They were to make themselves separate and holy out of reverence for God, because this was going to be a big event. They were going to set up limits around the temple. The mountain was to be set off and holy. That was God's basically seat for this conversation. People were not to touch it, and that would show that they were not respecting God in this discussion. So they make all these preparations. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. The Lord warns the people to abide by the commands so that they do not get punished for desecrating this mountain. And Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you yourself warned us, saying, set limits around the mountains and consecrate it. So, okay, we're obeying you. We're doing what you said. And then God gives the people of Israel the commandments, the laws. These first commandments in Exodus 20, we know as the 10 Commandments. So this is the first thing that God told Israel. And even today, Gentiles like me, people who are not from Israel, people who are not Jews, recognize that these commands are worth obeying. No other gods before God. No carved images or idols. Do not take the name of the Lord God in vain. So if you say, oh my God, I think that would be an example of that. I say it just now because I'm using it as an example. So it's not in vain. It's not meaningless. I am using it so that you know the kind of example that I'm talking about. But if you're not actually talking about God or to God when you're saying that thing, then I think you're saying it in vain. Basically, don't blaspheme God's name. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. There's a specific day that God wants to commemorate every week. Uh, do not work on the Sabbath day, basically. Oh, this is interesting, by the way. Let's look at this verse, because this will be related. But the seventh day, okay, is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant, or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. So let's look at the words male servant and female servant, because that is the people that we're talking about as far as slavery, Israeli slavery. Thy manservant nor thy maidservant. So that's what we're looking for. The Hebrew word ebed for the manservant. The Hebrew word ama for the slave, for the maidservant, the female slave. That is the people group that we're referring to. So, one thing I want to point out is there was one day out of the week, every week, that the master of the slave in Israel was not to make them work. The slave was supposed to not work one day out of the week. Very different, I think, from American chattel slavery, where if the master had no responsibility over his slaves. Now, maybe in America that would have been tempered by an understanding that we do not work on the Sabbath. I think that would have carried over maybe from Christianity. I don't know how it actually played out in America. Another example would be Rome. Had probably had that kind of slavery where people were treated as property. They would not have had a Christian influence on their slavery. So this would be a better, and I'm not saying that this slavery is desirable. I don't see the Bible ever considering slavery to be a positive thing. But this would have been preferable than the Roman form of chattel slavery. I believe Egypt probably would have had the same chattel slavery. So again, Israel were slaves in Egypt. This whole nation of people that Moses is talking to, they have just come out of Egypt as slaves. They were crying out to God because they were being oppressed by Egypt as slaves. And then they get past the Red Sea, finally escape Egypt. They get to Sinai. And on the seventh day, do not make your slaves work, is one of these 10 commandments. On the seventh day, you're to give your slaves rest. Honor your father and your mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. So do not give false testimony. Sounds like a court situation. We would interpret it, don't lie, but also the wording here seems like a court situation. So we don't want to read more into it than there is, but we don't want to read less into it than there is either. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, ox, his male servant, so his ebed or his ama, or his ox or his donkey or anything that is your neighbor's, anything. So again, looking at the concept of war, this would be you do not want to, coveting is what leads to war based on James 4. So got these 10 commandments God was giving Israel. Now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moses, "You speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us lest we die." That is the greatness of God, is that if he were to show himself to us face to face, in all of his fullness, it would be a life and death situation for us. We would be that terrified. The people stood far. Moses was trying to let them know God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. So this is good. This is God putting the fear of him in you, because otherwise you would not revere him. You would not hold him as holy as you ought to, and you would sin against him. The people stood afar off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. So Moses now is getting the rest of the law directly from God. So God comments on this. You've seen for yourselves that I've talked to you from heaven. Make no gods before me. Be respectful of the altar. There were rules about the altar where they were going to make sacrifices to God. So this is all about the nature of God. You've seen, you've realized that I am to be feared, so you ought to hold me at, in reverence, basically, is what that's saying. Then the very next thing, the very first thing after that God says is about slaves. The very next section that God deals with is about slaves. So this is, I imagine, top priority in God's mind as he's establishing this nation of Israel. So let's just check on the wording of this. If you buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. So it says Hebrew servant. That was not something I noticed while I was studying, but I'll have to account for that. So if the slave was of the Hebrew nation, there was this stipulation that he was going to serve for 6 years, in the 7th he should go free for nothing. You were going to release him in the 7th year. So slavery was not a lifelong thing like it was in the United States. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. So this is very strange to us, very different culturally to us, and obviously the whole slavery situation is different to us. Let me go ahead and say, again, Israel came from a state of being slaves. So Israel had been in Egypt, where the nation of Egypt had held them as slaves. So God is establishing a new nation in a world where slavery already exists. So, and this is an agrarian nation. So a lot of labor involved in raising the crops. I don't give this as a reason why slavery should be. I don't think slavery is positive. But as Israel is a nation that is interacting with the nations around them, then they're dealing with the realities of the world that already exist. They are going to have nations around them who are owning slaves and trading slaves. And how is Israel supposed to deal with that situation? And I'll get in a little more to it, because you might say, well, God should just say Israel shouldn't own any slaves. That's clear. There's another factor I want to bring in, but I'll get to that in a bit. So, a Hebrew slave was to be released in the 7th year of his slavery. You weren't to be a slave for more than 7 years unless. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door of the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave forever. So this was a ceremony that would go on if the slave willingly said, it is better for me to be here than to be free. Then he did not have to go free. He could be a permanent member of his master's family. So this was not a negative thing. This was a positive thing where it's out of love for his master and his family that the slave decides to stay here. I imagine the majority of slaves probably were ready to set out on their own once the slavery was over. So when a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. So why would a man sell his daughter as a slave? Possibly out of financial hardship. I want to dispel a reason that a man would sell his daughter as a slave, because there is a second form of slavery that we're aware of, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So this is saying that a female slave, an amma, would not be released in the 7th year like the male slaves do. Why is that? I was thinking of a Bible story in Bible story. We call them Bible stories. It makes them sound like fairy tales, more like a historical account found in the Bible. The Book of Ruth. So there is not a slave in the Book of Ruth. There is no reference to slavery in the Book of Ruth, but I think it demonstrates the plight of women in the nation of Israel. The book of Ruth starts with a lady named Naomi. Naomi was married to a man who moved his family to the country of Moab. So Moab was not Israel. It was a foreign nation. They stayed in Moab because there was an attack in Israel. It was better to live in Moab. And while they were there, the man's two sons, Naomi's two sons, married two Moabite women, and one of those women was Ruth. So Ruth was a Moabitess. She was not an Israelite. She was a foreigner, what would be called a sojourner in the passages that I'm talking about. Sojourners were one of the people who were not to work on the Sabbath. So the Ruth and Naomi were there in Moab, and Naomi's husband died, and each of Naomi's sons died. So the two Moabite women who married these sons were widows, just like Naomi was a widow. And Naomi was in a foreign land, and she heard that the famine in Israel ended, and she said, I need to go back to my people. I need to go back to my family, to the culture that I've left behind. I need to move back. And she told her daughters-in-law, these Moabite women, you go back to your people. You don't need to follow me. I'll go back to my people. You go back to your people. And Ruth said, your people will be my people from now on. Your God will be my God. I'm going with you. Couldn't be dissuaded, so she went back to Israel with Naomi. So now Naomi and Ruth are living alone in Israel. And again, it's an agrarian society. A lot of the food that you're raising is going to be your own food. Maybe if you live in a city, then you may be able to trade for food. But a number of people would live out kind of more in a rural setting, raising animals and gardening crops, that kind of thing. And so Naomi and Ruth are poor women. Ruth is a foreigner, which is even lower estate than Naomi. But they're just not making ends meet. And Naomi says, Ruth, you've got to do something. You've got to go out to the fields and glean for food. Gleaning would be, in the Israeli law, the people of Israel were supposed to leave crops behind for the poor. When they did a harvest, they were not to go over their trees and their crops a second time. Anything that they missed the first time was supposed to be left for the poor. And so Naomi tells Ruth, we're poor. And we are not going to survive unless you can scrounge for food in someone else's fields. So Ruth goes out to the field of a man named Boaz, who happens to be related to Naomi. But Ruth goes out to Boaz's field and is gleaning for what's left behind for the poor in this field. And Boaz notices her and is impressed by what he notices. Asks his servants about her and finds out that she's the daughter-in-law of Naomi. And he tells Ruth, you stay in my field and you stay with the women in my field. You do not stay with the men in my field. You stay with the women in my field, and there you will be protected. Because for a woman in this era, obviously Israel is under the law. There are things that Israel is supposed to be doing to protect its people, but people sin. People rebel against God. People allow the passions of their hearts to take over. And cause them to do things that are destructive. And so Boaz, understanding this, recognizes that a woman is going to have a hard time fighting off a man who is going to do something evil to her. And he says, I will see to it that you're taken care of and you're protected, and you stay with the women where you guys are watching out for each other. Actually, I may be a little bit off. It may have been Naomi, Ruth coming back home and telling Naomi this is what happened during the day, and Naomi making sure you don't stay with the men, you stay with the women as you're doing your work in that field. But Boaz said, you may stay here at my field, you'll be safe. Don't go to someone else's field where you don't know what will happen to you there. So why would a woman not be released after 7 years? If a woman is being released on her own, she may not have the means to ensure she's protected from evil people. I'm not saying this is the only reason. This is my best guess. I'm giving you my interpretation. This is my best guess about why God would give these instructions to the nation of Israel, why God would make a distinction between male slaves being released after 7 years and female slaves not being released, staying in their master's house. And my understanding was for a woman on her own during that time, it was not a safe situation. A lot of the time, even in free families, if you were a woman in your father's house, you would wait in your father's house until someone decided he wanted to marry you, and then the marriage would be arranged, arranged marriage. So you never really lived as a single person outside of your father's house. You were always under the protection of your family, and then eventually under the protection of your husband. So that is the cultural setup that I think this verse is relating to. We're going to protect the female slaves. Now, if a master is going to act in opposition to the laws of Israel that I'm going to describe here, then there's some recourse for her, I think. But she was to be in a protected situation. If it was a man who was obeying God's law, then she would be in a good place. There was a possibility that the master would want to marry a female slave. So if she does not please her master who has designated her for himself, so if she was going to be married to him and then he decided not to follow through with that, no, we're not going to get married, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has broken faith with her. So he's decided, no, this girl who's come into my house, I'm not going to have a marriage relationship with her. He's not to sell her off to a nation that might misuse and abuse her, a nation that won't have the protective laws of Israel. She is not to be sold as chattel. So that's interesting. You do not sell her as chattel. He shall keep her in Israel, where if her family ever has the means to buy her back, then they can do so. Redeemed, that word has the idea of buying back and especially of being rescued. He should have her available so that her family can rescue her. If he designates her for his son, that's a possibility. He shall treat her as a daughter. He shall deal with her as with a daughter. So she is now treated as a member of the family, not just as a slave. If he takes another wife to himself, so Israel was a nation of where men could have multiple wives. I don't think that was ideal. I think that was something that God, like divorce, like slavery, I'm thinking this was a situation where God is allowing for the culture that Israel is coming out of. Not that these are good things. I think if you look at how the Bible works and the people that God selects, the people that God uses, you see that he wants one man for one woman. He did not make Adam, Eve, and then anyone else. I know there's stories of a woman named Lilith, but she is not found in the Bible at all. It was Adam and Eve, one man and one woman. And I think that is the arrangement that God has for the family throughout the Bible. It's where people have deviated from that arrangement that we see people with multiple wives in Scripture. But if this is one of those men, if there's a man that takes a second wife, he shall not diminish the slave's food, her clothing, or her marital rights. So he's still to treat the slave just as importantly as he did. She is not to be superseded by this woman who is coming into the household. And if he does not do these three things for her, she shall go out for nothing without payment of money. So if he's not even willing to take care of his wife, that's not a good situation for her to be in. She needs to get out of there. She's allowed to get out of there. She's allowed to get free. Nobody has to rescue her. If she does have family, she could probably go back to her family. Nothing against that. But she is not staying at that house. So let's see. I think that's the end of that section on slavery. So the words used here for the male slave, the female slave. I just want to double check the language here since I did not notice Hebrew before. Ibri. So yeah, sir, would be Hebrew. Then the Hebrew word for Hebrew language. Do you speak Hebrew? That last word would be Ibrit today. And I am curious because I was looking at this in the King James Version. Did it delineate that? Yeah, so that's just something I missed there. If you buy a Hebrew servant. Okay. The next passage, I think you'll see why I'm a little bit confused. So let's go on to the next verse on this. And I want to make sure I've got the right reference. Going to look through my cards. There we are. Leviticus 25. And that colon gets in my way if I try to type that. So we can just go there. And we're going to start in verse 38. So all the way down here. So if thy brother be waxen poor, so he falls on hard times. Let's go back to the ESV. If your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself with you, you shall support him as though he were a stranger and a sojourner, and he shall live with you. Why does it say as if he were a stranger and a sojourner? Is this treating someone worse? Since he's poor, are we treating him worse? Let me grab another verse. Going to have to flip through my disorganized cards. I do apologize. I think it was toward the back of my stack here. So I was planning to have music available for this stream, and I just realized I forgot to turn it on. So maybe I'll go ahead and do that when I get a moment. I had some technical difficulties and I had to turn it back off again, and just now I realized it was missing. Forgot it on the last stream last week also. My card has the verse in the Bible that I want to refer to. Tell you what, music first. I'll sort it out later. Yep, this is the okay, is that working? Yes, it is. Good. I want to make sure I get the right verse, so I do need to dig up the proper card. If I did not have the card, I probably would not have the reference to begin with. So here we are. Actually, there's a few verses for this. So let me pull up a new tab here, because I don't want to leave this section. This section's very important. So we'll go to Exodus 22, verse 21. Here we go. You shall not wrong a sojourner. So that same idea, foreigner. This would be someone like Ruth, like a Moabitess. Someone from a land outside who is now in and doing business in Israel. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You were foreigners in Egypt. You know what it's like to be oppressed. Don't do it. Exodus 23:9. Let me actually get to the individual verse. You shall not oppress a sojourner. You know the heart of a sojourner, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. So that command shows up twice. Leviticus. Exodus is the account of Israel leaving. It's Leviticus 19. It's the account of Israel leaving Egypt and establishing themselves. Okay, fair enough. As a nation, it's before they had the tabernacle. It's the time of Israel up until they created this tabernacle to go with them in the wilderness while they were worshiping God. Once they had the tabernacle, they needed rules for how it was going to be run. So Leviticus refers to the family of Levi, who God chose to be the priests who would work in the tabernacle. And that revolves around the laws for the Levites. But it has some laws for Israel too. When a stranger sojourners with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you. And you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So very, very important that these strangers were treated well. Patrick, welcome back. That's all right. I don't mind you being late. That's your prerogative when you come. I am sorry your latte, though. I would hate to be coffee, too. So I hope you're feeling well. So I was just answering one of the questions that came up last week about slavery in the Bible. I think this is an important question, but I do want to prioritize answering any questions that you might have about Christianity, about what I believe, that kind of thing, since I didn't get a chance to answer a lot of your questions this last time. In the time before you arrived, I did give my thoughts on why wars exist, and I gave my thoughts on let's see, what was it? Whether we invented or discovered math. So later on, you may want to check the beginning of the stream, and I answered Truth for Satan Ministries' question about why innocent people are punished if God is perfectly just. So that's the first one I answered, and then I got to your two questions after that. Did you bring any questions about Christianity or about being a Christian or how Christianity affects my understanding of the world that we're in? And I'll just fill in the air by going to where I was. I'll let you go ahead and answer that when you have a moment. But in this section, if someone becomes poor and cannot continue to exist, you shall treat him like a native, basically, of Israel. You will treat him with the respect that you would show one of your fellow Israelites, and he shall live with you. You're not going to demean him just because he's poor. You are going to hold him in a kind of honor because you know what it's like to be a stranger and a foreigner. So in a way, I feel like this is an even higher level of respect. Even though you're treating this person as if they were a native with you, it's a higher respect than just treating someone as your neighbor. You treat your brother as one way, but if you are treating someone who you recognize has had hardships that same way, then there's a level of respect that I think is higher. I know me and my brother did not get along well as kids, so that's why I use that as an example. We had sibling rivalry going on. You tend to take for granted those who are close to you. But if you recognize that someone has been through hardship, maybe you would be a bit more compassionate toward them. Patrick, if you're interested, I was talking about the question Truth for Satan Ministries brought up about why women are, why the Bible says women are to be sold like cattle. I'll go ahead and translate that for you. He used the word chattel, but it's the idea of people being treated as property. And so I was looking earlier, you can go back to the VOD if you're curious and see what I said before, but there's a verse that actually says women shouldn't be treated that way. God was dealing with Israel coming out of a culture of slavery. Israel was slaves in Egypt, so they knew what that was like. And they were going to be dealing with other nations that would be holding slaves. And so God was saying, if you're going to get involved in this kind of trade, then I have some rules for you. One, your slave should not work for one day out of the week on the Sabbath. The special day that people were to not work, that goes for your slave too. They're not to work on the Sabbath. If you're a male slave, then you get to go free like on the 7th year. You stay in your master's house and work for 7 years, but then you go free after that 7 years. And I think it's interesting. There's a story of a man named Jacob, one of the founding fathers of Israel. There's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob had a time where he was serving his, I think it was his uncle Laban. And Laban had 2 daughters. And in Israel at this time that Jacob was, they took it to be fine to have multiple wives. I don't think that's something that God promotes, but that's what they would do back in this time. So Jacob liked the younger daughter, and Laban said, you can work for me for 7 years and get the younger daughter. And so that was the arrangement that Jacob made with him, but Laban was tricky, and he gave Jacob the older daughter instead at the end of the 7 years. He tricked Jacob into taking the older daughter. And when Jacob realized he'd been tricked on his wedding night, or after his wedding night, then he complained, and Laban said, well, you know, it's our custom to give the older daughter before the younger daughter. I had to give her to you. So if you work for me for 7 more years, then I'll give you the younger daughter. And so, okay, like Jacob agreed to work for 7 more years for the one he wanted. And so he then got to marry the younger daughter. So now he's got this family that he's kind of developed. So if he were going to go free, he doesn't really have the means to take care of his wives and the children that he's had with the first wife. So actually, no, the way I understand it, the first daughter actually was barren. So it would have just been the wives that he had. No, I'm getting it mixed up. The first wife had children. The second wife did not was barren for a while. Anyway, Jacob so Jacob didn't have a lot of means to take care of the family, so then Laban made him work another 7 years to get goods to take care of the family, and then Jacob eventually escaped from him. So there's a principle here. Slaves were to be released after 7 years. I would not be surprised if it's related to what Jacob had to go through in order to start his family, kind of like a callback to that. So you asked, just wondering, would you ever do Minecraft mods? Maybe in the distant future. I played Minecraft for a bit, became bored of it. To be honest, if I'm playing Minecraft, I do enjoy playing it with mods. So that is possibly a fix for me becoming a little bit disinterested in it. I think I would be curious about playing it the way that, with the new version that Mojang is working on, they've got the 1.17 now. They're coming out with the 1.18, which is going to have the higher mountains and the deeper caves. So I would want to see what mods become available for those new versions, and probably play in those new versions rather than the ones that have a lot of the mod variety nowadays. So I'm thinking this is one of those questions that I could well make a video on and could create I could get more in depth in a video, and it would be on a specific topic. So the people who think they could have value from that would then benefit from a video. So in short, okay, I was going to suggest a 1.16.5 mod. Okay, so let me wrap up this question, and then I'll be happy to hear what you're saying about the mod. I'll wrap up here. In short, the response to Truth for Satan Ministries about why does God say women can be bought and sold like chattel? He does not. God does not say women can be bought and sold like chattel. There's a lot more in here. I was interested in. There are a lot of ways that God protected the slave in Israel They had a lot more protection than the average slave in other countries. So if you were a slave, then every 7 years, you could only work for as long as 7 years, and then you got released. If the year of Jubilee came along, which was a year that came every 50 years, a special year, then you could be released on the year of Jubilee. So let's say you became a slave and worked for 4 years, but then the year of Jubilee happened, then you could be freed in that 4th year. Of course, you got the day off on the Sabbath, so you were not working for the full week. You were not working your entire life without stop, the way you might in another nation. If your master was cruel, then if he was beating you badly enough that, say, you lost an eye or you lost a tooth, the Bible said you had to go free if that happened to you. So that encourages masters to be restrained in how they punish their slaves. You're not just lording it over your slave when your slave does something wrong. You are being careful about how you discipline a slave. Maybe there's actual punishment that needs to be made. Legally, beatings were not supposed to be more than 40 lashes in Israel. So I don't know what level of damage that would have done. I don't think it had to be 40 lashes every time, but that was the topmost. When Jesus was getting ready to go to the cross, he was judged by the Roman system, and they did not have a limitation on how many lashes that you had to go through, and he was beaten by them before he went on the cross. So the situation in Israel would have been better. And if it was bad enough, then you could be freed there. There was, also if you escaped. If things were intolerable for you and you left your master, you escaped successfully, they could not take you back to your master. You could not be captured and returned to your master. You had to be allowed to live wherever you wanted in the country as a free man. So since you're not escaping, then things are tolerable, bearable, then you are... The slavery system is more complicit. Not saying that slavery is great. The Bible never says that slavery is a good thing. But it's preferable to the slavery that was going on. And if you're releasing your slaves every 7 years, then it is a more difficult system to keep up than the one that we had in the Americas, say, where you're keeping your slaves for life. Last point I wanted to make, there was this concept in Exodus 21. I'll go back to that. So when a man sells his daughter as a slave, what is this? Is this something sordid? In America, we have something called human trafficking, where people will capture or deceive women and sell them for evil things. Then is this related? I don't believe so. I think this is a case. One of the ways that someone could be a slave is if he stole, say, a sheep or something. And maybe he was on hard times, needed food, stole a sheep so that he'd have something to eat. And he was supposed to pay back 4 times what he stole. So if he did not have that to pay back, then he would be sold into slavery. So he had the finances to pay back the crime for the sheep. And this would be, I think, a similar situation where someone might be sold as a slave. Either someone would sell themselves, or a man might sell his daughter. Kind of, not specifically for a marital relationship, even though that's explained in this section. Possibly for labor also. In order to sustain the family, give the family the finances to continue to survive. Again, women are protected. There are protections for slaves in general. I'm sure if she needed to escape, then she would be free to do so. So this was not, I do not see this being the same kind of slavery we have in America today, where women are being captured and abused the way that we do today. There is a law here. I won't go and hunt for it, but there is a law in this area that you could not steal a person. If you steal someone, whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death. So kidnapping to sell someone into slavery is a definite no-no. That is not what happens, not how people get into slavery in the Bible, unlike the way it was in America in the 1800s, where people from Africa would be captured to be sold into slavery. So this would preclude anything like that happening. So I'm done. I can go into more detail about that in a video if I put that together. Patrick, so what was this mod you were talking about? You said it adds new crafts and a new biome, more structures, and one guy that will stay with you. So I'm curious, what's the name of this Minecraft mod you're suggesting? I'm sorry, your computer is not working well. I had some technical difficulties with my computer getting set up for the stream also, so. Oh, welcome back. What was the name of the mod you were suggesting? It sounds like it might be interesting. Your browser is dying. Okay. So I'm guessing that's probably affecting your ability to watch the stream. For Forge, Herobrine. Herobrine, huh? I know about I've heard of Herobrine. So, that sounds fun. Like, if you're for the horror experience, it sounds fun. All right, so that could keep things interesting with Minecraft. It's not scary. Okay, so I may have to look into it, because Subnautica is about as close as I get to anything horrific. So Herobrine does not have a positive reputation in the Minecraft community, but that might be fun. Sent on Discord. Thank you very much. So last week while we were talking, I know I was on and Forge 1.16.5. Thank you. So last week while I was talking, I was on a particular topic, so I didn't get a chance to answer a lot of your questions last week. And I know you said that it was hard for you to keep up because you're not really familiar with the religious stuff that I'm talking about. I think it would be great if there was some way that I could help you to understand enough to be able to get involved in conversations, because I asked you once upon a time if you wanted me to include you in religious conversations, and you said yes. So my question is, what can I do for you to help you to be able to join into the conversations that I have? Because a lot of what I talk about on my channel is religion. I think I'm done here. I can go ahead and go full screen. There we go. And I think I'll minimize that on my other monitor. Okay, epic, great. So, sounds like we both want the same thing. Are there any questions that I can answer for you, or is there a way that I can help what I believe to be more relatable to you? Because you were saying that it was difficult to keep up with what I was saying because you don't do religion. I don't know. Okay. Do you know what it is about not doing religion that you think might get in the way of you being able to follow along with what I'm saying? What is it that makes when I talk more heavy than it not so easy to understand, I guess, is the way that that I would put that. What I think, feel like we're in a more conversational mode. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and fire up Subnautica. I'll play that for about a half hour. So I'll give us something to watch. But I do want to see if there's some way. I do want to see if there's some way that I can help you, because when we get together, Patrick, and I'm talking about, I'll also send Optifine. Thank you. I've tried Optifine before, so that definitely helps, especially before Minecraft came out with the new telescopes in 1.17. When we're on chat together or when we're playing games, it's fun for me to be able to play games with you and to chat about the games. But I don't feel like we get into anything that's really important. So it's fun. But what I would like to do is get into things that are meaningful. Talk about things that are meaningful. So for me, what's meaningful a lot of the time is religion, especially Christianity. But I'm very interested in what people believe. And I think even not believing in a religion, there's an aspect of that also. So if you don't find meaning in a religion, then what do you find meaning in? That would be very interesting to me. If you don't have a religion that you're aware of, then what do you, what replaces that? So that's what I would be curious in. I'm going to turn off the music because we're going to have Subnautica music soon. Let's see, pause. I'll just turn that off. And I'm loading up Subnautica. And I want to make sure, yes, play. I want to make sure that YouTube knows that I am going to be going into gameplay now. Make sure this is all accurate. Get my stats all set up. There we go. And let me pull the proper screen up, because you can hear that in the background. There we are. I'll put that where it belongs. Let's see, Forge, I think is the one that I tend to use, mods with. So that's an old one. I'm going to delete that one. We're going to start a new game. I'm a monster. I delete my old games. And we'll go on survival. The mod uses Forge. Good. So that'll be familiar to me. And then I'll have to see if my stream setup works for how Subnautica lays out. I like Forge because you don't need an API to use mods. I'm not familiar with APIs, probably because I use Forge. The mods need their own API to use. There have been times I've downloaded mods and they have like a dependency is what I've seen. So you need to download something else in order to make the mod work. I wonder if that's the API that you're referring to. Yes, okay. So we're both on the same page. But this mod, the Herobrine mod, doesn't use an API. Okay, here we go with the intro.
Failure imminent. All personnel abandon ship. Launch in 3, 2, 1.
Have you seen Subnautica before, Patrick, or is this your first time? I'm belted in here. Maybe I should not be belted in here. Gotta deal with that. Okay. Handy fire extinguisher. Yes. Oh, I got burned. Okay. Great start. Okay. Everything's fixed. So this is my inventory. Oh no. Game is chopping.
You have suffered.
It looks smooth on my side. Is this browser?
An optimal outcome. This PDA has now rebooted in emergency mode with one directive: to keep you alive on an alien world. Please refer to the databank for detailed survival advice. Good luck.
Okay, so you say it's good now. I wonder if it's because of all of the fire and stuff. If there's a lot of the graphical issues. I do not know if adjusting my settings would help you, Patrick, or if this is an issue with your computer. So if you see choppiness, again, let me know. I'll see if I can diminish my settings. So it's telling me about my... Okay, so this is broken. Need a repair tool. Warning. Circuitry test failed, so probably because of that. Secondary systems offline, radio offline. Hull integrity, okay. That's about the only thing we've got going for us. This is storage. So I've got food in storage, flares, water. I've got my fire extinguisher and a voice log. So minor head trauma. Data bank for detailed survival advice, survival package, start here. So if you are reading this, then you have survived an emergency evacuation of a capital class ship equipped with technology. Congratulations, the hard part is over. Something tells me that's not true. Okay, M&Ms. Sounds good. So your PDA has automatically rebooted in emergency mode. This system has one directive: to keep you alive on a hostile alien world. Welcome back, and I hope you enjoy your M&Ms. So, if it is not possible to keep you alive on a hostile alien world, the system will alert salvage teams to the location of your remains. So, good to know that my family will have something to bury. It features... Oh, and a cat, even better. Full monitoring of vital signs for timely survival advice, good. Blueprints for fabricating a range of essential equipment, yeah. Onboard camera, microphone, OCR technology, okay. Cross-compatible, yeah. So your personal and network files have been encrypted and may be retrieved at a later time by a licensed engineer. I don't care. So first thing, administer first aid. I am a little bit injured. Let's see what I can do about that. Whoop, wrong button. There we go. First aid kit. Do I need that just now? 101%. My browser is doing livened. So not live is it chopping up again? Databank. Next, take an inventory of the available materials and supplies and decide on rations. I have 2 food bars and 2 water. Survey the environment for threats and resources. Construct necessary survival equipment using this life pod's fabricator. So what can I do? Resources, basic stuff, electronics, water. That might be good. So if I can get bleach, how do I get bleach? I need salt and coral. Okay. So water will probably become important. And then what equipment? Got an oxygen tank that needs titanium. That knife looks good. Silicone rubber and titanium. And the silicone rubber needs grapevine seeds. So, Let's go exploring. Whoop. Okay. Heard something weird. That's the something weird.
Orbital hull failure. Cause unknown. 0 human life signs detected.
Okay, so that's the Aurora. Lots of hull failure. 0 human life signs detected. That's not good. Okay, and it looks like my face is not blocking the readout, so that's good. You can see how much oxygen I don't have. This fish looks like it might be food.
New creature discovered.
I'll have to look into that later. Oops, I let it go by accident. And I'm on half a lung of air here. Big boat. Yep. So, let's see. This. How do I get just my hand? There we go. Now I'm better. I need coral and I need salt. Oh, words. Might be good. Break. Titanium. That's one of the things I needed. There's a weird looking fish.
New creature discovered.
Another break. Rock.
Copper is an essential component of all powered equipment. Your probability of survival has just increased to unlikely, but plausible.
Plausible is good. What's that? It looks like a tube. It looks like a coral tube. So how do I get at it? There was that knife thing that I could make. But I need titanium for that. This looks metal. And I need vine seeds so that I can make rubber. Yeah, lots of fish, which is good because apparently fish is food now. And I am hungry, actually. So, resources. Titanium, good. And sustenance, fish, good. Let's cook that one.
The fabricator cooks small organisms while disposing of the skeletal structure, bodily fluids, and internal organs, thus rendering them safe for human consumption.
I guess that's a good thing. So, what I'm looking for is this knife. So I need silicone rubber and titanium. Grapevine seed clusters. Let me eat my fish. There we go. Doesn't look very nice in the inventory. Caps. Okay. I've played this before, so I do kind of know where I might find the vines that I'm looking for. You are Markiplier? Not often. So he's not one of the people that I tend to follow. I do know he's a popular game streamer, so definitely has worked hard to earn his reputation. Okay, this fish looks weird. Got a hole in its tail. Oops! Maybe I do need that air tank. 6, 3. Ooh, it's really bad. It's like going down by 2 seconds. Yeah, I got a kind of drop jaw there. Tell you what, I'm going to go back for my air tank because I can get more metal for a knife. Now this area that I've landed in is called the Safe Shallows, so that's fortunate that I landed in the safe spot. Let's get an air tank. And I think I'll cook this fish too, because I'm still hungry.
New blueprint acquired.
Okay, and is my air tank equipped? Yes, it is. And it's dark already. Now in the safe shallows, I'm pretty safe in the dark. But where I'm going, there are creatures that hunt in the dark. So maybe this is not a great idea. Can't see for anything in the dark. Okay, 51. Oxygen, 48. It's still dropping like crazy. By 3 seconds at a time. What's this? I'm not used to that. I think I'm going a different way than I want to. There should be vines somewhere around here. There's scrap, so I might be able to pick up some more metal. Grab trap fragment, but it looks like I can't pick that up yet. Need something special for those. And these are nice. They make these air bubbles, so they fill up my oxygen. Went day to night really fast. No kidding. Sometimes it gets completely black, and that's because there's a planet crossing over the sun. But this looks like actual nighttime. Let's see. There's a moon. There's another moon. The sun's on the other side of the planet, but it'll come up in no time. Yeah, big planet. Big moon. I don't know if that's scientifically possible, if a planet can get that close and stay in orbit. Oh, there's the vines I'm looking for. Looks like cheese. This looks like metal. I'm afraid one of those hunters is going to be in the area. They like metal. There's one. That guy. That guy. Is this? I don't see anything I can pick up there. I like cheese on just about anything. Cheese makes everything better. Okay. So I want metal and I want vines, but there's a hunter near there, and I think this set of vines, they tend to be pretty populous. So that's the seeds I need, though.
Detecting increased local radiation levels.
Oh, and I'm hearing weird noises.
Consistent with damage to the Aurora's drive core.
I heard something roar.
During planet fall.
Okay. Grab and go. Maybe another one. I heard a chomp. I'm going to leave.
New blueprint acquired.
Big octopus, and you should get MSI Afterburner. I'm not familiar with that, and something is about to explode and hurt me. I heard something about ready to explode and hurt me, but I don't know where it is. Did I dodge it? I never dodged those things. So what is MSI Afterburner? Is that metal? Yay! Okay. So back to home smoky home. And got the tank for blueprints, but I should have what I need to make rubber now. There we go. I'll send a screenshot on Discord. Thank you very much. I'm hungry again. And I need water, but I can't get that without a knife. Titanium, please? Now can I have a knife? I got a knife.
Weapons were removed from standard survival blueprints following the massacre on Abraxas Prime. The knife remains the only exception.
So I can't fabricate a gun, huh? Shows things about your PC. Are you still having any trouble with seeing the stream properly? Because if I need to turn down any graphics settings, maybe that would be easier for your computer. Okay. Yeah, but it sounds like a good tool. So if there are any issues, then it sounds like it would be good for diagnosing them. So I have a knife. I should get coral. Well, how do I get to this knife? There we go. That looks like coral. Good. Now, that's good. There we go. So that should be enough coral for now. And then did I have salt? No, I need salt for bleach. This game makes you salty. I do know where salt tends to be, but it's less safe. Come here, fish. Use up all my calories just chasing you. I lost him. These guys are easier to catch.
New creature discovered.
Looking for salt in there. I didn't see any. Whoops. Looks like I'm pretty close to that thing. It's a lot bigger up closer, though. So salt, salt, salt. I'm getting thirsty, and I would rather not use up the water that I've got in rations. More metal down there. Is that salt or is that... There's salt. And this is where predators like to hang out too. That's quartz, but I may need that in the near future. So I'll see what I can do with what I've collected.
"30 seconds.
And I'll go straight up instead of diagonally. That's one of those predators down there. Oh, he's hiding in the sand. You can't see him anymore. More metal. Okay, so this stuff is not interesting until you know what it's good for. I'll cook that guy because they're not very nutritious. They're easy to catch, so I need some food, but not a lot of food. What can I make now? A standard oxygen tank. This one I'll need silver for. I'm not quite there yet. Fire extinguisher, pipe. So I could make a scanner. That could be useful. Need a battery for that. Repair tool is definitely useful because I need to make repairs. The flashlight might be useful. Flares. I don't tend to use flares. Useful for distracting certain predators. Huh. And the habitat builder is fun. Then the only thing I need is the locker, and I just tend to manage my own inventory, so I'm thinking what I want is definitely a battery and some cave sulfur. And the battery, electronics, need acid mushrooms. I know where to pick up those. Ta-da! Battery. And
New blueprint acquired.
scanner. I don't need a battery for the scanner, so I'll go ahead and... I mean for the repair tool, so I'll go ahead and do that.
The scanner can be used to synthesize blueprints from salvage technology and to record alien biological data.
Okay. What's this guy? Doesn't look like he's got good manners. I probably don't want to be at this angle. Oh. Okay, that is scanned. I'm gonna get a breath. Kinda need it around here. I can't resist that metal. Okay. Seems like the things you need take longer to scan. The things you don't need, they're kind of frivolous, then they don't take so long to scan. I've got 70, 80, 90, 100%. There's some more of those creep finds, but I guess I need cave sulfur, so that implies I need to go down in a cave. I don't like this. I'm going to get hurt. Come on, there we go. Hello, anybody home? Want to make sure I get air when I can if I'm going to go cave diving. Ooh, and I am thirsty. I did get salt. I should make water at my life pod. Because I don't think I packed any. That is bad survival skills. That will take bleach.
Bleach is an essential chemical used for cleaning wounds and purifying water.
Good, that's what I want. Get 2 water from this.
Preparing the day's water ration
Whoop.
ahead of time will help ensure against dehydration and eventual death.
I need both of those water. So I'm going to need more salt. And I guess I don't need coral. I guess I only need 1 coral. Wouldn't hurt to get more. Well, I'm looking for cave sulfur. Well, I can... Okay. I was having trouble getting to my knife. Okay, that'll be enough. Don't want to use up too much inventory space. There's a cave. This is probably the kind of cave I'm looking for. How do I descend? Nope. I'm not finding the right key here. There we... Nope, I thought I was. There we go, that's it. That is definitely what I'm looking for and afraid of. Good thing I've got full health. Let's go. Okay, where is it? There it is. And I don't have flippers. I'm not going to be able to escape this. There's air. I'll get situated over the air. Oh, too late. Ah, bye. Yeah. But I can get cave sulfur now. Assuming he's got no friends. I wouldn't be his friend.
Detecting sulfur deposits in the local cave systems. Sulfur is an essential component of the repair tool.
Mm-hmm. Okay, caught that oxygen. Good. Okay, so I have the cave sulfur, which means I can now make the repair tool. And that means I can repair this thing.
Okay. Secondary systems online. Running full
Good.
diagnostic and outputting results to databank.
Okay, so now I've got something telling me about my environment. I'm going to have to wrap up soon because my dog is giving me the stare that tells me he needs me. So just a moment. Where is that scan? I'll read that off and then I'll be done for the day. So we are on a Category 3 ocean planet with a oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere just like Earth with extensive biodiversity. Warning, may support Leviathan class predators. Water contaminated with high levels of foreign bacteria. That doesn't sound good. We know about plagues around here. Planet is beyond Federation space. Rescue unlikely. That's not good either. It's not recommended to explore this environment without hazardous material suits. Don't have. And extensive support apparatus. You mean like a scuba tank? I hope that's all we need. Okay, so it's 10 o'clock my time now. So I'm going to call it quits. Going to take care of my dog. Going to save my game. Okay, it's saved. So Patrick, it's been good having you on stream. And I'll see you. I'll see you next week maybe if you show up. And wrapping it up here. So God bless you and play kind. Let me pause that.